Sisters and brothers, have you ever had your heart shattered so badly that you wondered if you'd ever breathe again? When the person you trusted walked away, when the dream you held crumbled, when the future you planned vanished overnight, your soul whispered, "It's over." But let me tell you, what feels like the end is often God's setup for a brand new beginning. Stay with me, because in the very place where your heart is breaking, God is preparing a breakthrough that will rewrite your story. When heartbreak strikes, it feels like the rug has been pulled out from under your feet. It is the moment when dreams collapse, relationships crumble, or expectations are shattered into fragments you never thought you would have to hold. The weight of it can convince you that the story is over, that the chapter has ended in tragedy, and there is no more ink left in the pen. But when God is the author, a broken page is never the last page. What we see as an ending, heaven often sees as a setup, a divine redirection that moves us into something far greater than what we imagined. Heartbreak has a way of narrowing our vision. It makes us look only at what was lost, what didn't work out, who left, or what failed. The enemy loves to use heartbreak to whisper lies. You are finished. You are unwanted. You will never recover. This is all there is. But God speaks a different word. He says, I am still writing. I am still weaving. I am still building something out of what you cannot see right now. If you look through the lens of eternity, you'll discover that heartbreak is not a wall that blocks you in, but a doorway that ushers you into a new season where God's greater plan is revealed. Consider Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, stripped of his identity, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison on false charges. His heartbreak came in layers. If anyone had reason to believe his life was over, it was Joseph. Yet every heartbreak was not a period. It was a comma. Each disappointment was pushing him closer to his destiny. What felt like devastation in the pit and the prison was actually preparation for the palace. God was positioning Joseph to save nations, and without the heartbreak, the assignment would have never been fulfilled. Your story might not look like Joseph's, but the principle is the same. What breaks your heart may be the very thing that God uses to open your eyes. What feels like rejection may be protection. What feels like the end of the road may be God's hand turning you onto a higher path. When your heart breaks, your faith is invited to rise. It is in those cracks of brokenness that the light of God's glory shines the brightest. Sometimes heartbreak forces you to let go of what you were never meant to cling to in the first place. We often hold so tightly to our plans, our timelines, our relationships, and our desires, believing they are essential to our future. But heartbreak teaches us that what we thought was essential may have only been temporary. God loves you too much to allow you to build your life on something that won't last. He will let it break so he can rebuild it on something stronger. Think about the potter and the clay. A potter will sometimes break down a vessel to reshape it into something greater. Not because it had no value, but because it was not yet in the form he envisioned. Your heartbreak might feel like you've been smashed on the wheel of life, but in the hands of the master potter, every broken piece is being molded into a shape that will carry his glory and his purpose. The breaking is not a sign of rejection. It is a sign of divine reconstruction. We often define our lives by the moments of heartbreak, but God defines our lives by what he brings out of those moments. David, running from Saul and betrayed by people he served, knew the sting of heartbreak. Yet it was in the caves and wilderness that David learned to lean on God like never before. The songs we now read in Psalms were often born in the soil of heartbreak. Without the heartbreak, there would be no testimony of God's faithfulness that still strengthens millions today. The truth is, heartbreak is a crossroads. You can allow it to trap you in despair, or you can choose to see it as the stage for God's greater plan. It will either be the grave of your hope or the ground where new faith is planted. The choice is yours. When you believe that God is sovereign, even in heartbreak, you refuse to let pain have the final word. Every heartbreak carries hidden purpose. That relationship that ended may have looked like a loss, but perhaps God saw change you could not see. That job that slipped through your fingers may have seemed like a setback, but perhaps God was making room for a promotion you could not imagine. The heartbreak you're carrying is not wasted. It's recycled by heaven into something that will serve your future. The hardest part is trusting when you don't see the outcome. Heartbreak rarely comes with explanations. You may never fully understand why it happened the way it did, but faith doesn't require explanations. It requires expectation. Expectation that if God allowed the heartbreak, he will use it for good. Expectation that if he closed a door, it's because he's opening a better one. Expectation that the tears you cry today will water the harvest you reap tomorrow. It may not feel like it right now, but heartbreak can become holy ground. It's the place where you encounter God in ways you never could when life was comfortable. It's the place where prayer becomes deeper, worship becomes real, and dependence on God becomes non-negotiable. Sometimes God allows your heart to break so you can finally lean on him with your whole weight. And when you do, you'll discover a strength you didn't know you had. You'll find joy rising from ashes, peace springing from pain, and hope being born from hurt. The enemy's goal is to bury you under heartbreak, but God's goal is to plant you in it. And when you are planted, you will rise again stronger, wiser, and more anchored than before. So if your heart is breaking, don't see it as the end of your story. See it as the setup for a new chapter that God is about to write. Because what looks like devastation in your eyes may be the preparation of destiny in God's hands. Pain has a way of convincing us that we are alone. When the weight of heartbreak presses on your chest, when the nights feel endless and the silence grows louder than any words, you begin to wonder if God has stepped back, if he has gone distant, if somehow your tears don't matter. But that's not the truth. The truth is God is closest when the pain is deepest. He doesn't retreat from brokenness. He draws near to it. His word declares that he is near to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit. Your pain doesn't repel him, it attracts him. The valley that makes you feel abandoned is the very valley where his presence becomes undeniable. Think about the image of the shepherd. The sheep that is wounded or wandering isn't ignored. It's the one the shepherd goes after. He leaves the 99 to find the one that is hurting, lost, or caught in the thorns. That's how God responds to your pain. He is not a spectator watching from a distance. He steps into the shadows, into the ache, into the heartbreak. While others may not notice your tears, he bottles every single one of them. While others may grow tired of hearing your story, he listens every time you pray, even when your prayers are groans too deep for words. We often equate God's presence with joy, peace, and celebration, but some of the most profound encounters with him happen in the darkness of sorrow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego discovered this truth in the furnace. It was in the middle of the fire, not outside of it, that the fourth man appeared. They didn't meet him before the flames, and he didn't wait until after the flames. He stepped right into the hottest part of their trial and showed them his glory there. Heartbreak may be your furnace, but it's also your opportunity to see the one who walks with you when no one else can. There's a certain kind of intimacy that only comes in suffering. When life is easy, we can go days without deeply depending on God. But when heartbreak hits, you find yourself on your knees, leaning on him for every breath. That closeness, that deep reliance builds a bond that comfort never could. Just as oil is pressed out of olives only under crushing, the richness of God's presence often flows most powerfully in seasons of pain. Take Elijah as an example. After his victory on Mount Carmel, he plunged into despair under a broom tree, asking God to take his life. He was weary, broken, and feeling completely alone. Yet it was in that low place that God met him, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a gentle whisper. God's presence was not absent in Elijah's heartbreak. It was more personal than ever. That same whisper comes to you in your heartbreak, reminding you that he has not forgotten you, that he is still with you, and that he has more for your life than what you see in this moment of pain. When the psalmist wrote, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." He wasn't speaking as someone untouched by pain. He was speaking as someone who had walked through real valleys, loss, betrayal, danger, heartbreak, but he learned that the presence of God didn't vanish in the valley. In fact, it became more vivid there. Notice it doesn't say God removed the valley. It says God walked with him through it. Sometimes we want God to erase our heartbreak immediately, but he chooses instead to accompany us through it. His It doesn't always prevent the pain, but it transforms the experience of it. There's something powerful about knowing you are not alone in your pain. Isolation magnifies suffering, but presence softens it. When a loved one sits beside you in silence during grief, you feel a measure of comfort, not because the situation has changed, but because you're not bearing it by yourself. Multiply that by infinity, and you begin to understand what it means for God himself to be with you in heartbreak. He is the companion who never leaves your side, the comforter who never grows weary, the friend who knows your pain even better than you do. The presence of God in heartbreak also brings perspective. Pain tells you this is permanent, but his presence reminds you it's temporary. Pain tells you you're abandoned, but his presence assures you you're held. Pain tells you you're too weak to make it, but his presence whispers that his strength is made perfect in weakness. Without his presence, heartbreak becomes unbearable. With his presence, heartbreak becomes a passage, a difficult one, yes, but one that leads somewhere greater. Paul discovered this when he pleaded for his thorn to be removed. God didn't take the thorn away, but he promised his grace would be sufficient. That grace is not just a theological idea. It is the tangible nearness of God giving you the strength to endure what you thought would crush you. When the pain doesn't lift, his presence lifts you. When the heartbreak doesn't heal overnight, his presence holds you steady until it does. Sometimes God's presence in your pain isn't about immediate answers, but about assurance. Assurance that he knows, that he sees, that he cares. Assurance that you are not forgotten in the crowd of humanity. Assurance that the creator of the universe is bending low to walk with you in your valley. That assurance may not erase the cheat, but it gives you hope to keep going. And often it is in hindsight that you realize just how present God was. Looking back, you see that the moments you thought you were abandoned were the moments he was carrying you. You see the subtle ways he provided comfort, the unexpected people he sent into your life, the inner strength you didn't know you had. These are all fingerprints of his presence in the middle of your heartbreak. So when the nights stretch long and the tears won't stop, remember this: God is not watching from a distance. He is right there in the middle of it with you. The deeper the pain, the closer he leans in. The valley doesn't scare him. The fire doesn't burn him. The heartbreak doesn't make him retreat. In fact, it becomes the very place where his love and faithfulness are revealed in ways you may never have seen otherwise. When we think of brokenness, we often think of loss, defeat, or devastation. It's the shattering of expectations, the collapse of what we thought was secure, the unraveling of what we thought we could count on. And yet, in the strange economy of God's kingdom, brokenness is not where life ends. It's where breakthrough begins. The very thing that seems to crush you can be the catalyst that launches you into a new dimension of strength, clarity, and purpose. A seed must break before life can come forth. Buried in the dark, unseen and forgotten, it cracks open under the pressure of the soil. But it is only through that breaking that it can push upward toward the light and grow into what it was always meant to be. Without breaking, it stays dormant, full of potential, but never producing fruit. Your life works the same way. Without the breaking, without the heartbreak, the hidden potential God placed inside of you would never be released. Scripture is filled with people who encountered their greatest breakthroughs right after seasons of deep brokenness. Take Hannah, for instance. She wept bitterly over her inability to bear children. Year after year, her heartbreak deepened as her prayers seemed unanswered. But it was out of that broken cry that Samuel was born, a prophet who would anoint kings and lead a nation. Her breakthrough came through her brokenness. What felt like an unbearable burden became the birthplace of her greatest blessing. Think also of Peter. He swore he would never deny Jesus, but when the pressure came, he broke down in fear and denied him 3 times. His heart shattered when he realized what he had done. Yet it was through that very breaking that God rebuilt him into the bold leader who preached at Pentecost and saw thousands come to Christ. His greatest failure positioned him for his greatest breakthrough. Brokenness has a way of stripping us of pride, of illusions of self-dependence. It empties our hands so that God can fill them with something better. As long as we are holding tightly to our own plans, our own strength, and our own control, there is little room for God to do what he desires. But when life breaks us open, when what we clung to falls apart, that's when God can pour in his power. That's when he can turn weakness into strength and mourning into joy. We resist brokenness because it hurts. It feels like we're losing ground, like everything is falling apart. But in God's hands, brokenness is not destruction, it's construction. It's the process by which he rebuilds you into someone stronger, wiser, and more prepared for what lies ahead. The breakthrough that comes after brokenness isn't just about external blessings. It's about internal transformation. It's about becoming the person God created you to be. Think about Gideon. He and his 300 men were outnumbered by an army too vast to count. All they had were trumpets, torches, and jars. And God told them to break the jars. When the jars shattered, the light inside blazed forth, confusing the enemy and securing victory. The breakthrough came at the moment of breaking. In the same way, there is light inside of you that cannot shine until something breaks. It's in the cracks of your life that God's glory is revealed most brightly. Your heartbreak may feel like a crushing weight, but it may also be the breaking of the jar that releases a new level of God's presence and power through you. Sometimes the very thing you thought would destroy you becomes the thing God uses to display his strength. The places where you feel most broken can become the very platforms from which you testify of his faithfulness. The world tells us to hide our brokenness, to cover it up, to pretend everything is fine, but God says to bring it to him. He specializes in taking broken pieces and creating beauty. A mosaic is only beautiful because the pieces were once broken. In his hands, your brokenness becomes a masterpiece that tells a story of redemption and hope. One of the reasons breakthrough often follows brokenness is because brokenness makes us desperate. And desperation drives us to God with a sincerity and intensity we don't always have when life is easy. When everything is going smoothly, prayer can become routine. Worship can become casual. But when heartbreak enters, prayer becomes your lifeline. Worship becomes your anchor. Brokenness strips away the surface level faith and digs deep until you encounter God at a new depth. That encounter is often the doorway to breakthrough. Consider Job. He lost everything. Family, health, wealth. His heart was broken in ways few can imagine. Yet in the ashes of his pain, Job encountered God in a way he never had before. He said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." His brokenness opened the door to a breakthrough in his relationship with God, and eventually restoration followed. The truth is, brokenness humbles us, and humility is the soil where breakthrough grows. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. When you are broken, you are in the perfect posture to. Receive grace. Grace to endure, grace to heal, grace to rise again. And it is that grace that brings breakthrough, opening doors, shifting circumstances, and rewriting your story. Sometimes the breakthrough isn't about God changing your circumstances, but about God changing you. The heartbreak may remain, the loss may still sting, but suddenly you find a strength you didn't know you had. Suddenly peace shows up where fear once lived. Suddenly joy starts breaking through the cracks of sorrow. That's a breakthrough too. The kind that transforms you from the inside out, making you unshakable no matter what storms come. It's easy to look at brokenness as a punishment, but often it's preparation. Preparation for greater influence, greater responsibility, greater impact. God can trust the broken vessel because the broken vessel knows it is nothing without him. When you've been broken, pride dies, self-reliance fades, and dependency on God grows. And it is in that posture that God entrusts more because he knows you will give him the glory. So don't despise the breaking. Don't assume the heartbreak is the end. What feels like ruin may be the very soil where God is planting your breakthrough. Just as a seed cannot grow unless it is buried and broken, your destiny cannot fully flourish until you've walked through seasons of breaking. But once you do, you will rise, not as the same person you were, but as someone transformed, strengthened, and ready for the next assignment God has for you. Hope can feel fragile when you're carrying heartbreak. You replay what you've lost. You rehearse the moments that broke you, and the weight of absence becomes heavier than the joy of presence. The human heart has a tendency to anchor itself in things that fade. Relationships, possessions, opportunities, positions. But when those anchors are cut loose, when the waves of heartbreak crash in, you discover whether your hope was built on sand or on solid rock. Real hope isn't in what slipped through your fingers. It's in the one who holds you with hands that never let go. People will come and go. Even the closest companions can walk away, not always out of malice, but sometimes out of weakness or change. Circumstances shift. Jobs that once felt secure can vanish overnight. Health can fail. Dreams can stall. Doors you thought would always be open can slam shut without warning. If your hope is tied to those things, heartbreak will dismantle you. But if your hope is anchored in God, the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then heartbreak can bend you, but it cannot break you. Think about the Apostle Paul. He knew what it meant to lose. He lost status, he lost comfort, he lost friends, and he even lost freedom sitting in prison cells because of his faith. Yet he wrote about joy and hope with a strength that confounds us. Why? Because his hope wasn't in chains being broken. It was in the one who had already broken the power of sin and death. His letters remind us that you can be in a prison and still have hope, because hope rooted in God cannot be chained. Hope rooted in people will always be shaky because people are human. They disappoint, they fail, they misunderstand. But God is not like man. He does not lie. He does not change his mind, and he does not walk away. When heartbreak tells you everything is over, hope anchored in God says, he who began a good work in me will carry it to completion. When heartbreak convinces you that you're forgotten, hope anchored in God says, I am engraved on the palms of his hands. That is hope no storm can steal. It is tempting in heartbreak to replay what you lost so often that you begin to define yourself by absence rather than presence. But the truth is, what you lost does not define you. The one who keeps you does. Your identity is not wrapped in a relationship, a title, or a circumstance. Your identity is wrapped in the eternal God who calls you his child. And because that relationship cannot be severed, your hope cannot be stolen. Consider Job. He lost everything: children, wealth, health, even the support of his spouse. His friends misunderstood him and accused him. His heart was crushed under unimaginable weight. Yet even in his pain, Job declared, I know that my Redeemer lives. His hope wasn't in regaining what was lost. It was in the God who was unshakably alive. And that declaration of hope eventually paved the way for restoration. But notice the hope came before the restoration. The anchor was God himself, not the outcome. There's a reason scripture calls hope an anchor for the soul. An anchor holds steady in turbulent waters. It doesn't stop the storm, but it keeps the ship from drifting into destruction. That's what hope in God does for you. Heartbreak may rage like a storm, tossing your emotions and your thoughts, but the anchor of God's faithfulness keeps you from being swept away. You may rock, you may feel the winds, but you will not be destroyed. Hope in God also shifts your vision. Instead of looking endlessly at what is gone, it turns your eyes toward what remains and what's to come. It reminds you that God is not finished writing your story, that even when pages have been torn out, the author holds the pen and he can write redemption where you only see ruin. Hope refuses to let your past determine your future. Sometimes we think of hope as wishful thinking, but biblical hope is not fragile or vague. It is not, I hope things might get better. It is a confident expectation rooted in the character of God. It says, because God is faithful, I can trust that better days are ahead. It says, because God loves me, I know this pain will not have the final word. It says, because God is sovereign, this heartbreak will serve a greater purpose I may not see yet. That kind of hope is unshakable because it's tied to the unshakable one. David often wrote about hope in the Psalms, and many of those songs were penned out of heartbreak. He was betrayed, hunted, and brokenhearted, yet over and over again he reminded his soul to hope in God. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Put your hope in God. Sometimes you have to talk to yourself that way. Sometimes you have to preach to your own heart in the middle of pain, reminding yourself that your hope isn't in the shifting sand of life circumstances, but in the solid rock of God's presence. When your hope is anchored in God, heartbreak becomes survivable. And not just survivable, but transformational. You begin to see that what you lost was never meant to carry you forever. You begin to discover a deeper intimacy with God, one that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect. You find joy that isn't tied to possessions, peace that isn't tied to understanding, and strength that isn't tied to your own resources. This is the kind of hope that makes you resilient, the kind of hope that rebuilds you from the inside out. One of the greatest lies heartbreak tells is that the future is empty, but hope reminds you that the future is full because God is already there. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. That means he is already present in the chapters you haven't read yet. You can trust that he has gone before you, and because he is faithful, what's ahead will not be wasted. Even when the loss is permanent in human terms, like the death of a loved one, hope in God stretches beyond the limits of this world. It tells you that death is not the end, that eternity is real, and that God's promises extend beyond the grave. That's why Paul could say that we do not grieve like those who have no hope. Heartbreak may pierce you, but eternal hope carries you through. So when your heart aches for what you can't get back, shift your eyes to what can never be taken away. You cannot lose God's love. You cannot lose his promises. You cannot lose his presence. And those unshakable realities are enough to carry you through the deepest heartbreak and into a future filled with light.